By 1168, the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt was hollowing out from the inside. For 2 centuries, this Shia Ismaili dynasty controlled massive wealth, but the later caliphs were reduced to figureheads, watching as their own viziers fought civil wars, leaving the state exposed to the expanding Crusader kingdoms to the northeast. Into this fractured landscape stepped a young Kurdish military commander serving the Syrian army. Yusuf ibn Ayyub, better known to history as Saladin, was initially a reluctant soldier with a scholarly temperament. Yet at 31 years old, he arrived in Egypt as part of a Syrian expedition and quickly maneuvered into the highest administrative post in the land. The transition of power was shockingly quiet. In September 1171, as the final Fatimid Caliph lay dying, Saladin switched the Friday prayers across Egypt to honor the Sunni Caliph in Baghdad. 200 years of Shia rule evaporated without a single battle. Realizing the constant threat of Crusader raids from the coast, he immediately fortified his new capital. He drafted designs based on Crusader forts he had studied and began constructing the massive citadel of Cairo on a limestone spur overlooking the city. Saladin transformed Egypt from a failing sectarian state into the logistical and ideological anchor of a unified Islamic resistance. By taking control of the Nile Valley, he secured an economic engine capable of funding decades of warfare against the Latin states. Saladin swept into Syria and the Fertile Crescent, annexing Damascus and Aleppo. By 1183, the Ayyubid domain stretched from Yemen all the way to northern Mesopotamia, effectively trapping the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem and its neighbors against the sea. The Latin kingdoms survived these encirclements by relying on formidable stone fortresses like the Chevaliers and Carrick, manned by deeply entrenched professional military orders. For over a decade, the conflict was defined by truces and skirmishes, but when Crusader lords repeatedly broke these agreements by attacking Muslim merchant caravans and threatening the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, Saladin galvanized a massive coalition army. On July 4, 1187, he trapped the Crusader forces in the arid landscape of Hattin, annihilating their ranks. By eliminating the bulk of the Latin military at Hattin, the path lay open. Within 3 months, Saladin recaptured the holy city of Jerusalem, ending nearly a century of European occupation. The fall of Jerusalem triggered the Third Crusade, bringing King Richard the Lionheart to the shores of the Levant. For years, the two commanders traded tactical victories and defensive stands, ultimately fighting each other to a state of mutual exhaustion. They signed a treaty that left Jerusalem in Muslim hands. Saladin had proved that a unified, well-funded Islamic state could halt European expansion. He died shortly after, in 1193, securing a reputation that would echo for centuries. But the Ayyubid Empire was organized like a family business. Upon Saladin's death, his brothers and sons carved up the territory into competing regional fiefdoms, trading unified strength for perpetual rivalries. Without the focus of a holy war, later sultans prioritized trade and economic stability. Sultan al-Kamil even negotiated with the Sixth Crusade, peacefully handing Jerusalem back to European control in 1229 to avoid a costly war. By the 1240s, the dynasty was fracturing. Sultan al-Ayyub ruled from Cairo, but he was surrounded by hostile family members and staring down the threat of entirely new crusades. He desperately needed soldiers whose loyalty belonged exclusively to him, so he drastically expanded an older Islamic military practice. He purchased young boys from the Kipchak Turkish steppes, converted them to Islam, and subjected them to grueling martial training to mold them into an elite class of slave soldiers known as Mamluks. Al-Salih housed these men on an island in the Nile, creating a hyper-concentrated unit called the Bahriya. With nearly 1,000 heavily armored cavalrymen, it quickly became the most lethal fighting force in the Middle East. By centralizing his power within a single elite regiment, Al-Salih inadvertently created a military elite that no longer needed a sultan to rule. His survival now rested entirely in the hands of the men he had bought and trained. The ultimate test of this system arrived in 1249. King Louis IX of France landed a massive crusading force on the Egyptian coast and began marching toward Cairo. In the middle of this crisis, Sultan al-Saleh died in his tent from tuberculosis. If the army found out their commander was dead, they would scatter in panic. Recognizing this, his widow, Shajar al-Dur, took control of the state in secret. She forged his signature, issued orders in his name, and kept his death hidden to hold the military together. Her deception bought the Mamluk commanders enough time to organize a devastating counterattack. At the Battle of Al-Mansoura, the elite cavalry regiments routed the French forces, decimated the Crusader knights, and eventually captured King Louis himself. The invasion was crushed. The dynasty was saved. But then, the late Sultan's son, Turan Shah, arrived from the north to claim the throne. Almost immediately, he began stripping the victorious Mamluk officers of their ranks, trying to replace them with his own loyalists. The Bahriya did not hesitate. In May 1250, the very soldiers who had just saved Egypt cornered their new sultan on the banks of the Nile and cut him down. Shajar al-Durr stepped out of the shadows, briefly taking the title of sultaness, the only woman to do so in medieval Egyptian history. But under pressure from Baghdad, she soon married a Mamluk commander. The Ayyubid bloodline was finished. The Ayyubid family survived the full combined might of European crusades, only to be eradicated by the bodyguard they built to protect themselves. This timeline illustrates how brief the Ayyubid period was. In 80 years, they shifted the regional balance of power, moving the Sunni world center from Baghdad to the Nile. They anchored Egypt into the Sunni sphere, an alignment remaining to this day. They built massive citadels, hospitals, and madrasas, turning Cairo into a dominant hub of Islamic scholarship and architecture. They cemented the legacy of Saladin, giving global history its archetype of the honorable warrior statesman. The Ayyubids were the crucible that forged the Mamluk Sultanate, the military caste that would rule for centuries and ultimately save the region from the Mongol catastrophe.